this is Diane's Fantasy Football. Who would have thought that going into week 6, a ginger would be the top fantasy football quarterback? Gingers are doing it for themselves. Andy Dalton opening doors for gingers everywhere. And if Andy Dalton's your quarterback, start him. Josh McCown also set a franchise record for the Browns. He threw for 457 yards and 3 touchdowns against that win over the Ravens. Initially, I was like, why the fuck did they start Josh McCown? They should be starting Manziel. I was quickly shut down when McCown came in and just wrecked shop. Although Denver's got the #1 defense, I would say if you're feeling lucky and you have Josh McCown as your quarterback, start him. Your no-brainer starters are going to be guys like Eli Manning, Doug Martin, Andre Johnson, Allen Robinson, and Antonio Gates. Travis Kelce, Kansas City's tight end. My pick is Justin Forsett over Chris Ivory. You're also going to want to start Emmanuel Sanders and Brandon Marshall. On my fantasy team, it's a toss-up between Mark Ingram or Melvin Gordon. So I'm going to sit Melvin Gordon and start Mark Ingram, and the Falcons defense have given up over 9 touchdowns to running backs. TJ Yeldon at Houston. Kind of a no-brainer. Houston's having a really tough time stopping those running backs. You're going to want to start DeMarco Murray, who was targeted 8 times with 7 receptions against the Saints. He's going up against Giants this weekend, whose defense is looking kind of weak because of all of those injuries. It's time for Torrey Smith to have a breakout game. He will be played to his full potential this weekend against the Ravens. The Ravens have given up the second most fantasy points to wide receivers. Guys I would definitely sit this weekend: John Brown, Keenan Allen, Melvin Gordon, Alfred Morris, and Jeremy Hill. If Jamal Charles is your running back, I would highly recommend picking up Sharkhandrick West. He will be starting in place of Jamal Charles. EJ Manuel will be starting in place of Tyrod Taylor. Stud or dud? What a man, what a man, what a man, what a mighty good man. Singing now. What a man, what a... Freeman, my #1 running back, continues to be a stud. Brandon Cooks finally shows up. He had 5 catches for 107 yards against the Eagles. Definitely start him. Ty Montgomery, who I just picked up, caught 4 of 5 targets last week against the Rams and had 1 touchdown. He's not the #1 target for Aaron Rodgers, but Aaron Rodgers is my quarterback on my fantasy team. And since guys like Lacey, Cobb, and Jones were already taken, I went ahead and picked this guy up because they'll get those combo points if they score a touchdown together. Yay! Antonio Gates came straight out the gates last weekend with 2 touchdowns and 21 fantasy points. He wasn't picked up in my league, so I dropped Clay and picked up Gates. Willis Snead had 11 targets and 6 receptions. Brandon Smith isn't balling out of control right now, so Breeze is going to be looking at Snead a lot. Atlanta gave up 300 yards to wide receivers when they played at Houston. Eddie Lacy has had a really slow start. His best performance was week 1. Last year, he finished strong with over 1,000 yards and 9 rushing touchdowns. Lacy is at home against the Chargers on Sunday, whose defense has given up over 6 touchdowns to running backs. So if he doesn't perform this weekend, I'd say it's time to find a different running back. Another dud for me has been Megatron. They're at home against Chicago this weekend, so we will see what happens. I would highly recommend picking up Allen Hurns, Jacksonville's wide receiver. Blake Bortles really likes this guy, and over the past 2 weeks, he's had over 230 yards and 2 touchdowns. Paired with Robinson and TJ Yeldon, these guys are going to ball out of control this weekend at Houston. Quarterback time! Russell Wilson's really not doing too much for me this season. My biggest beef with Russell Wilson: why don't you throw to Jimmy Graham more often? If he were at New Orleans still, he'd be a monster. I feel really bad for all the people that picked him up thinking that he was going to go off this season. If I were Jimmy Graham, I'd be pissed. Marcus Mariota is another guy that is not being used to his full potential. I'm going to take some time right now to call out that offensive coordinator. These short little passes that you've got Mariota doing aren't going to score you any touchdowns. I know last week I called Kaepernick Capper nothing. I think he might actually ball out this weekend with Anquan Bolden and Torrey Smith because they used to play for the Ravens and they're looking for revenge. I would definitely start Teddy Bridgewater at Kansas City. And I know you're thinking, why? Here's why. He is going up against the Chiefs this weekend, who have given up the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Do not start Phillip Rivers at Green Bay. Green Bay's defense went off last week. Green Bay just so happens to be my defense. I got 27 points. Beast mode should be back for Seattle, and he is expected to start against Carolina. Matt Stafford took a bad hit last week against the Cardinals, but he will be starting this weekend against the Bears. I'm Diane, and this has been Diane's Fantasy Football.